I've got a story today. Trouble is, it's where to begin. Oh, I know you're going to say at the beginning. But there are so many beginnings, do you not think? I'm just going to pick one. The sky was blue, the sun was hot, and the harbour was teeming with people. That's a good beginning, isn't it? A group of people were sitting on a ship. There were some sailors and some Roman soldiers and a group of prisoners. They'd come quite far on their journey already. One of them in particular, Paul, wasn't like the rest. They were all Roman citizens, and you could tell they were Roman citizens, but Paul was a little different. He looked and he sounded and he dressed like a Jew. But he did have Roman family, and that meant that he could go to Rome with the rest of the prisoners to have his case heard by Caesar. And for some reason that was very important to him. Well, I say to important to him, he told all the prisoners on the way and their journey so far about all the things he'd happened to him, and he'd had a fascinating life, and he was very keen on letting them know about his God. And it would often say, "My God told me this," or "My God showed me that," or "My God said something else," which was a bit strange to the Romans, who had lots and lots of gods, but none of them ever spoke to them directly. They'd been on their journey. They were going via Alexandria. The ship had been commandeered, as the Romans had a habit of doing, so the captain wasn't best pleased at having them along, extra mouths to feed, but there wasn't a right lot he could do about it. They'd landed in Crete, but it wasn't really a good place to stay for very long, so they wanted to move further along the coast. Paul, being Paul, was confident enough to go and talk to the captain. "My God says we should not set sail. This journey is dangerous, and we may even lose our lives." Now, to a hardened sailor, looking at a religious Jew who didn't seem to have done much work in his whole life, let alone been to sea, I think best to say it didn't go down very well. Paul got a mouthful of abuse and told to mind his own business. They were setting sail. Later that day, the wind got up. Oh, this was just what they needed. High tide, nice bit of wind, up went the sails, up went the anchors, and they drifted slowly out of the harbour. Everyone stood on the deck and saw the town disappearing off into the distance. The gulls followed them for a while, but even they got bored after a bit. And the slow, gentle rock of the ship just eased everybody's minds. Yeah, maybe this God of Paul's didn't know what he was talking about after all. They should have known better, really. That night, the wind started to change direction. It got stronger and stronger, and where I'd just lapped the sides of the boat now became reasonable waves that pushed it from side to side. The sailors weren't too bothered about this. They'd been in storms before, but the people, like the soldiers and the prisoners, they weren't right keen on this. It's that sort of light-headed feeling where you don't really feel like your head's attached to your body. And as time went on, the wind got stronger. And this slight slap, slap, slap became rise and fall, and rise and fall. This was no ordinary storm. It was hard up on deck. You couldn't stand on your feet properly, but it was even harder below deck. People were being sick in the corner. People were just not feeling very well. People were scared and were crying. It was just an awful place to be. Even the captain started to get worried when they started tying things down on the deck, and they tied the rudder so that they didn't lose it, and the sails had to come down. And they went up and down and up and down. This went on for hours upon hours. And the rain came down, hard and lashing against the side of the ship. And it went up and down and up and down. And the wind blew hard and cold and made the rain sting on your face. And it went up and down. When the waves started to get really big was when things got really bad. As the ship hit a wave, it would rise up into the air. And even if you were lying down, your whole body lifted and arched and even came away from the ship itself. And as the wave went down, the bodies would crash to the floor of the ship. Like a whole group of rag dolls that were being played with the sea in its full tantrum mode. Paul, he went through it like everybody else. He didn't feel so clever. And yet, there was something about him that was different than everybody else. Paul would feel sick like everybody else, and he'd have the bruises and the bumps from being thrown around as they went up and down like everybody else. But all the way along he kept saying, "It's okay. My God says I'm going to Rome. So Rome is where I'm going. It'll be alright." It got to a stage where nobody wanted anything to eat. Well, you couldn't keep it down for a start. And the only fresh water you could find was by going above deck and catching some rainwater in your hands. And everybody was feeling dehydrated and their heads were banging and they just felt so tired. And even the sailors were like, "You know what? Those waves look very inviting. I just want it to stop now." This went on for 2 whole weeks. There was no stars at night to navigate by. There was no sun during the day. In fact, the only way you knew it was daytime was the sky was a slightly lighter shade of grey. The captain had just washed his hands and said, "Well, we're just going to have to go where the sea takes us." After a couple of weeks, one morning they woke up and the rain had stopped. The ship still went up and down and up and down. Paul came out from below deck, walked to the captain, and as I said, he's not one for being quiet, isn't our Paul? He turned round to the captain and said, "I told you we shouldn't have set off. I told you this was a bad idea." At which point he was about to get a blow when he said, "But last night an angel came to me and saved me a message from my God. that everyone on this ship will be saved. There will not be a life lost if we stay on the ship. And to that end, I suggest we all have something to eat. By now, even the Roman soldiers had learnt to listen to Paul. He'd well and truly gained their respect. And so that's what they did. They scrabbled around and somebody found some bread that had been safely tied in oilcloth, and everybody had just a little mouthful, even those that weren't sure it was a good idea. Once they'd eaten, they began to feel a little bit better. And was it their imagination, or had the wind died down a bit? They weren't quite going up and down so much. The captain decided, I know what I'll do. I'll undo the rudder, we'll put the sail back up, and we'll see where the wind takes us. And so that's what they did. It wasn't long before somebody spotted land. Yes, at last they were going to be safe. They sent down the plumb line, and it came back with one depth, and they sailed a bit further and they put it down again, and it was little bit less, so they were obviously heading in the right direction. And then the final blow came when the front of the ship headed straight for a sandbar. They had no idea where they were, so no charts showing them the way into harbour were any good to them. With the front of the ship solidly stuck in the sand, the breakers coming into shore had a field day. The waves, though not as strong as out at sea, were strong enough to make the wood groan and creak and eventually snap and splinter. At this point, the sea was eager to make its way into every nook and cranny. Those that could swim jumped overboard and headed for the beach. Those that couldn't grabbed any floating bit of debris they could find. And those same waves that had been their enemy only days before were now their gentle saviour, as he took them into the beach and deposited them on the sand. The locals saw what was happening and came down to the beach to help, and built a big bonfire to get everybody warm and dry. And you know, Paul was right. There wasn't one life lost that day. Well, that's the end of my story, really. But as I said before, the end of one story is nothing but the beginning of the next.